Everybody, I'm Sean Robinson,
I'm Carson Grubaugh. Welcome to Living the Line.
and today we have the honor of talking to someone that we have actually talked about a lot, both on the channel and not, informally, as one of both of our favorite artists and a true innovator of the past century, somebody whose work even if you haven't actually seen his work. You see, normally, Dave, you don't get this. Your face is not going to be part of this introduction, right? So
Okay.
we'll block you out. But I mean,
Reveal.
a true polymath and somebody who is an expert in many fields. And we have been following with great interest your new work, Dave, and really appreciate you coming to talk with us about it and talk with us about this very odd time that we're living in. So, without any kind of further ado, man, thank you for doing this. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. And I particularly like the past century introduction. It definitely feels like that's it. It's all gone. That century's over. All the people involved in it can be retired. Bye-bye. We're into a new century now.
Right, and we've seen a few of these kind of turnovers where there's an industry that has some kind of revolution. In print. The first print work I ever did was in 1996 when I was a junior staffer on the Lake Howell High School newspaper, and I got to do paste up on the newspaper. And all of a sudden, all those people who I used to work with disappeared from the print field as soon as pre-press changed over to digital. And these places had an idea that they were going to just get rid of all these people who essentially brought the industry to where it was at that point. Who knew that we would be talking about the same thing in terms of visual artists, 30 years later, 20 years later? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, yes, there's a similarity. This feels like a quantum change because I'm not really looking at it just in terms of my job. I'm looking at it, I'm trying to see further than that and see what this means to society as a whole. I'm obviously completely bewildered and confused and alarmed by it. There's some excitement in there, but I don't know where I've settled really.
And we should say this that we're talking about is the past few months worth of development in image generation through quote unquote AI, artificial intelligence, neural networks, whatever you want to call it. And there were several of these competing things. And when Carson and I Carson got into Midjourney first, we were tipped off by somebody who follows us on the YouTube channel, and Carson got into
Yeah.
Thank you, RB. Carson got into Midjourney first and showed me some of the results, and I just had this sort of feeling of dread mixed with excitement, mixed with terror. I don't really. It's an odd thing, and what these things do, just so we can establish this, as to use the name of Dave's. Here's one of the first ones that you sent me, Carson.
This is the very first thing I sent you. I said I typed in Masamune Shiro, and oh my goodness.
And this abomination came into existence. So Dave is you have a new book that is a result of your first experiments with this, and it's called Prompt. There it is right there. And
Physical object.
Right. And we are working. We have our own physical objects coming out in terms of a mini series that's going to be coming out, distributed through Diamond in October, November, December, January. It's interesting to me. Like I got several reactions from people. First off, oh my gosh, this thing is terrifying, right? And other people were like, why would you even put this out? Like, go put it online. And it's like, I don't quite think you guys understand what's happening here. Making it a physical object, was that part of your initial goal when you realize, oh, hey, this is a book that I'm making? I mean, you wanted to make it something you could hold.
Yeah, it's really hard to say that I had that clear a thought. It really was a kind of panic attack. I'm only doing this because of you as well. This is all your fault. because I think you tagged my name and Bill Sinkovich's name in a press release, and that went out, and that went to Paul Gravett, who I'm sure you know, Centre of Comics in England. He tagged my name in his thing. That's the only reason why I saw it. If you had not done that, I'd still be living in a prelapsarian world of no AI and happily drawing my things.
Well,
I'm very sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, so the day after I kind of peeled myself off the floor, I mean, my reaction really was just, I've got to respond somehow. I've got to just do something, because it was absolutely filling my head, pushing everything else out. And unfortunately, I have this job where I can put this stuff somewhere. If I and that's true of everything. If I'm worried about something or angry about something or moved by something, I can put that into the stories that I tell. So I feel very privileged to have this job. So I'm hanging on to it for dear life. So I just thought I've got to do something. So I started doing something. And then on about the second or third day, I felt that it was a thing. It was going to be cohesive in some way. And by about the fifth day, I decided it was going to be a book. And I think in physical objects. I'm a physical object person. I don't believe anything that's only online exists. Really, I know that's not true, but that I'm afraid is my the sensibility I've come from. That's my background. That's the value system I have. It's very hard to just trash your whole value system when I've spent my formative years and my years in art school and my first professional years totally committed to that, building that, which has often meant pushing aside the previous bunch of value systems. I grew up in the 80s, and in that was an era when this is an example for you, a new school of comedy happened. And it was dubbed alternative comedy, and the idea was you punched up, not down. So it wasn't racist, it wasn't lazy, it wasn't picking on women being bad drivers and all those old lazy tropes. It was punching up to people in power, rule makers, people who were running things. But that meant a whole school of comedians just got pushed to one side. They were not cool anymore. They lost their television series and all that kind of stuff. And it was hard to feel real sympathy for that. But obviously, these are people just trying to do their job and get along and feed their kids and all that kind of stuff. So all that happened. And so I'm hanging on to the things that I believe in. I still really love physical objects, although I recognize in a world where energy is going to be an issue and cutting down trees is an issue, cutting down more trees to make books is probably an old school thought. And I think in comics, I think in sequences of images. So I thought I will pursue that. I'll do, because that's how I think naturally.
Right, and we should say your book is divided up into 3 different experiments, and the first experiment, centers around the Babylonian myths, myth of Gilgamesh, and the second involves topical, basically headlines as prompts, and then the third one is the most narrative of them, and has a sort of exploration of your daily walk and incorporates some manipulated versions of your photos. And it's an interesting sequence because I as a reader, I'm taking in the same kind of approach that you must have had when you're doing this. Like, oh, is this real? Like, what does this look like? Can it make this? And then you get the sort of horror of the headline and the manipulation of this, ghastly kind of created thing. And then there's a kind of, I don't know, acceptance is not quite the right thing, but you're turning it towards the narrative possibilities, has a sort of slightly more hopeful look to it. I guess, does it feel hopeful to you? But by the time you arrive there, is it just sort of?
Well, the first two stories are really just exploring the process. So setting up processes and watching it occur, teaching myself about it, just seeing what it would do. The first one, the reason why it's Gilgamesh is because that just happens to be in my head at the moment. I'm thinking about Gilgamesh for another project entirely. And it just happens to be what I'm thinking about at the moment. But it also is the oldest living existent human story. And it seems unutterably remote 4,000 years ago. And it was written in a visual language cuneiform on stone tablets. And so it just occurred to me I'd be curious to try and return it to a visual language, to see if over 4,000 years and from unknown anonymous stone carvers through the translations that have been going on over hundreds of years to the remote language of AI, whatever that is, if something of the narrative survived that process. That was one. So it was a process. And the second one, I was curious to see how AI sees us. Now I know AI is not some sort of alien intelligence, although that is how it feels. I was interested to see how they saw us, so that was the reason for the second experiment. Having done those two experiments, I wanted to kind of take all my questions and worries and anxieties and excitements and all of those things out on a walk and just talk to myself. But in process of talking to myself, I usually go out for a walk and I take a problem with me. So this was quite a big problem to take on a very long walk. I tried not to look too mad to the other people walking by muttering away to myself. And in amongst walking, I would think of questions to, when I got back home, I would ask the AI to vomit up an image for me and respond to that as part of the writing. So that was the process. Like everything else, when you're in the midst of it, there's an adrenaline rush and an excitement, and you're engaged with it, and it's kicking up ideas all the time, it's sparking, and all of that is exciting. Now I've come down the other side of that into, I don't know quite where I feel about it. I feel in a very strange place. I mean, I'm now seeing more and more Midjourney stuff by other people, and I actually feel quite sort of sick, quite physically sick as I'm seeing them, and I think it's a kind of anxiety sickness. And I've rested at a place quite similar to how I'm kind of rested about everything else that's going on in the world, which is my little island of my life here is okay. You know, I've got a house. I live in a nice place that I can walk. My family are okay. I'm married, and my marriage is okay. You know, my ability to draw so far is unimpaired. My little island is okay, but the rest of the world seems to be falling apart, and I can do nothing about it. And some of the reasons why are technological, and I'm left with this feeling that we continue to do things because we can do them without any forethought about what the implications are. And all technological advances are hugely powerful and have huge benefits. I'm not doubting the benefits, but I'm constantly thinking whether the net losses are worth the benefits. And I'm still undecided about that. But I have to say, I'm starting to lean on the negative. I'm starting to lean on. I don't think anybody thinks ahead about the disruption caused and what the collateral damage of that will be.
And I think that's one of the reasons I picked that C.S. Lewis essay for the first issue of ours. And I don't think it's a line out of that essay, but it's a line out of one of his other essays where he talks about progress, and that most people who are progressive, at least when he was writing, it tends to come with this idea of just blind progress, especially scientific progress. You just, like, progressive is attached to the idea of there's a barrier, we must go through it, like just because we can. And he said that's not what progress is. You're trying to progress towards something. So if you're trying to drive to Canada and you hit the Mexican border, the most progressive man is the man who turns around and heads to Canada, not who keeps going down, to Nicaragua. And I do feel like we just, especially scientifically and with technology, we just keep crashing through barriers with no overarching statement of where we're actually trying to get with it all. And that's dangerous.
Well, I think the other thing is the speed of it. I think, a lot of progress, social progress, whatever you want to think of, it happens quite a human speed, at quite a speed that you can sort of come to terms with it incrementally. So it kind of evolves. It evolves its way into, it's like natural selection. It's kind of social selection. And these things evolve in quite a careful, gentle way. Whereas I think the disruptors, it's much more like a sort of virus. You just throw it in and let the bomb go off and see what happens. And I think those sorts of experiments in computer models are benign enough. But we are now consistently just releasing them onto a society. It's already pretty confused and trying to deal with just day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. Going back to the analogy before about the print changes or changes in comedians and things like that. So in that case, we're talking about people's jobs or livelihoods. We might be talking about the quality of the industry might suffer after that changeover, where people who had knowledge have gone away. But we're not talking about something that's necessarily fundamental to humanity. Whereas when we're talking about art making and changing art making in a dramatic kind of way, we are talking about monkeying with something that has been around. As far as we know, this is the longest recorded human activity, because you can go into a cave in France and you can see marks that someone made in the dark, 20, how old is it? 20,000 years ago. And you talk about, compare that to the myth of Gilgamesh, and it's ancient, right? What's going to happen to the people who are growing up with this as a technology? I was chatting with someone, another artist, last night, and he was saying, well, people always have a need to create. Why would people cede that to a machine? And I said, well, people are going to feel like the machine is creating with their intent. People are going to get the idea that this thing is doing their will. Whereas, it's just not. It's not how it is,
Yes, I mean, I don't. I suppose that my worry is that is not. You see, you have to keep on redefining your terms all the time. I hesitate to say that's not creativity. What I mean is that's not how I define creativity, because the end result is not creativity. Just immediately zooming to the end result that's not creativity. The creativity is the journey to it. It's not the destination. And all of the human stuff, all the things that we learn and respond to and have to deal with ourselves, our frustrations, our excitements, all of those sorts of things are the doing of it along the way. It's the doing of it that's important. Now, I still think people will do things. I've been trying to think of an interesting analogy for this, because a lot of people's relationship to art and writing and all of these things is that they just appear. They just arrive on the newsstands or the bookstores. It's just arrives like magic. It's just there. Whereas obviously we know that there's a whole life of struggle and work and applying yourself and learning and all of that kind of thing that goes towards the end result. You don't just press a button and it immediately appears. If that part of creativity is removed, my worry is what effect that will have on society as a whole. I know that sounds like a hugely overblown thing to say, but I really don't think anybody's really thinking of that. I read this book, The Artist in the Machine, which is a sort of overview of AI research over the last few decades. And it includes AI programs that write poetry, that are supposed to come up with jokes, that are supposed to come up with screenplays, that come up with music composition, all of these sorts of things. And it was a fascinating book to read because it was interesting to get an overview of how everybody's approaching this. But I don't think a single person was asking why they were doing it. They were only asking about the technical issues involved in breaking down processes. And so it was incredibly frustrating because all the definitions of art and creativity that they were using, I just didn't recognize. They were not mine. Now that's fine, that could change. And if that's what we're looking at, I'm now the last century, and we're now going into this brave new world where all of my definitions of creativity, and those are informed by the previous 200 years, 2,000 years of creativity. If all of that changes, okay, fine. Then, but I want people to realize that that's what's happening. And is that what we want? That's all I'm asking. Is that what we want?
Yeah, and is it detrimental to the human entity? It sounds like, as part of your concern, that going through the processes is somehow kind of essential to what we are. I'm definitely viewing it, thinking about it as a revolution. Luciano Floridi, who provided an essay for the 5th issue, he has a philosophy of information, and one of his kind of starting points is saying there's been 4 revolutions. There's been the Copernican revolution, which the humans realized we're no longer at the center of the universe, right? And then there was I'm gonna miss one, but then there was the Freudian revolution, which is like we have to come to terms with the fact that we don't even fully understand ourselves, right? Like our psyche itself has been displaced from the center. And then the information revolution kind of further displaces us. The other one's Darwinian. We're not at the center of like the animal kingdom. And then the information revolution says, well, you're just like one informational entity among others. And what Floridi says that we have left to us is the poetic function of creating meaning. And this almost looks like it's a 5th revolution that could displace us from the center of meaning generation.
Yes.
And so that's not just potentially a different argument about creativity. It's really an argument about kind of our function, or what we feel is our function. And it sounds like that's a little bit what you're grinding against here.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting that you brought up the French caves. I think they're even older than that, and certainly human creativity has been tracked back about 50,000 years, I think. And the interesting thing about it is it seems to be creativity and communication seems to be the thing that has kick-started the size of our brains, or our journey down this particular evolutionary path. So creativity and language and communication is bound into our species. So to start to put that to one side, it seems like it needs more forethought than we're giving it. And we never know what's coming up, and we never know what uses people will put these things to, and how we'll proceed with it. So I'm not trying to be a Luddite, although I obviously sound it, and honestly, occasionally wish it that it could just be uninvented. I'm not trying to do that. I appreciate that lots of good things will come out of this, but I just wish some more forethought was put into these virus bombs before they're released. I had a chat about this. I've only done one other podcast about this. I did a couple of days ago with Gil Roth, and I never look at Twitter, although I have been looking at Twitter sort of through my fingers. just after this, because to do with this AI business, just out of curiosity to see what people are saying. And somebody had mentioned that I had not taken into account the fact that, for example, lots of disabled people will be able to now create things. Now, no, I didn't take that into account. I was really just talking about my own circumstance. That's all I know. That's the only voice I can really, the only place I can really speak from. But of course, that person is absolutely right. All kinds of wonderful enabling things will come out of technologies like this. But it's very easy. It's like a contract. It's very easy for things to be to focus on the good things and pretend that we don't have to worry about the bad things. And a contract, you only need a contract when things go wrong. You don't worry about it when things go right. Well, I think there have been enough now digital technologies released. I'm thinking particularly of anti-social media, to see that forethought needed to be given. Noah Yuval Harari in *Sapiens* has this line, technology is not prescriptive, meaning that it's not the technology that's demanding this. You know, we are in control of this. We can shape it. All kinds of decisions were made about the shape of social media or the way the internet works, behind closed doors, out of sight of anybody who might want to ask, what are you really doing here? And then just released. And I really think it needs more forethought. These things are too powerful. They are society shaping. And if all the benefits of social media end up with the collapse of democracy around the world, well, will we be asking, was it worth it? That's all I'm asking, I suppose.
The argument is going to be made, and has been made, at least, you know, I do promo for these things, like we were on The Gist with Mike Pesca, and I shared these things a few places, and I immediately got responses of people saying essentially like, this is going to democratize creativity. And somebody was sharing, you know, a painting that they made in Midjourney and was saying, I have the secret to how to make it make exactly what I think. And I have the secret formula, and this is exactly how I imagined it before I thought it. And I just, it was, I mean, I didn't respond. It was sad because I was seeing the ambition fulfilled of somebody who was that young artist who stopped at a certain point and said, this doesn't meet the image that I think I have in my brain anymore. You know, Carson and I both taught art. And I, as a high school instructor, encountered that all the time. And I had these reluctant people who just 3 or 4 years before had, you know, happily been filling up notebooks with drawings, and they hit like 12, 13 years old, and they get this intensely social period where all of a sudden the things that they are looking at don't reflect back what they want to see. And they stop right there. And somebody thinks, oh, this democratization, this is what it is, you know, that this is going to be a tool for those people to, you know, make their dreams come true. But the question for me is, what is it that's actually coming back, and what does that do to your mental processes as an artist or a, you know, aspiring artist or a visualizer, to have something appear as if you have created it, when in fact it is a complex composite based on your words. I mean, it's going to train an entire. I should stop it at the point where it sounds like a question. It's fine. A bad habit of mine.
It's fine, but I think they're right. It does democratize, but I don't think it democratizes creativity, because I don't think it's creativity. But that's just my definition of creativity. If that's now over the next few decades changes, and the meaning of creativity changes in reflection of technological advances, well, so be it. I'm just concerned about the loss, because the end result, it democratizes the achievement of end result. And it's astonishing to me, looking through the galleries at Midjourney and all of these things. It's an infinite amount of spectrum manuals. And those things are redundant. I mean, why would anybody do that now?
The 5% of people who just knows what a spectrum manual.
Yeah, sorry, I should explain.
No, it's fantastic. That's
no, it's perfect.
I should explain that. Yeah, look it up. And because a lot of that work is not really expressing anything. They're responses to jobs, their book covers and things like this, and it's a certain kind of image making. And if there was something to regard there, it was a huge amount of technical facility and ability to imagine those images and paint or airbrush them or whatever. Well, there's absolutely no reason to do any of that now. So if you call that the democratization of end result, that is what it is. And right now, this is the very beginnings of it. So the handful of people who are using it and making a splash or whatever, you'll have 6 months. And then everybody will be able to do everything. And that will be the new world. All the while, the important bit, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm old school, I don't count anymore, is that what you learn along the journey, along the way. It's the journey, not the end result. I've done lots of artwork that people like the end result, a cover for this, that, and the other. And they're basically meaningless to me. They were answers to a job. And I put my effort in and I tried to make them interesting or original or whatever, but they're essentially meaningless. I've done work where I was really trying to work something out or express something, or I felt angry about something and I wanted to put that down, or I was moved by something. I made a film called Luna about some friends of mine that lost a baby. I needed to put that story somewhere. That's important to me, that process of processing and expressing and working it through. That's all the art for me. The end result is on the shelf. Nobody else saw that process. That's entirely mine. But that's what's important to me. And that's where my meaning of life is. That's where my sense of purpose is. It's the journey. It's not the end result. It's not about the end result. So if all of this happens, I will continue to draw things. I may not show them to anybody. There may be no more market left for that. But I will do them to keep my own sanity. But I want people to realize that that's what creativity is so important for. In areas of art therapy, where people who can't draw or have never drawn or whatever enjoy getting an end result, a picture that they type in, that's great. And as part of a therapeutic world, that's fine. I mean, I'm not talking about that. I'm sure that'll be great. I'm talking about the world I know, trying to hang on to the world that I know and the benefits of it. And I think there are benefits there. I think there are deep mental health benefits there in being creative, not being professional, doing book covers, end result, the process of being creative. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on, but I think that's the core. And actually, I don't really have anybody else to talk to about this, so you can be my psychotherapist for the afternoon. It's talking this stuff through that makes me realize this deep sort of sick anxiety I feel looking at it.
I noticed that first off, you mentioned that in your book. I almost laughed out loud when you said, the audacity to call this thing Midjourney when it removes the journey is crazy. And I was like, yeah, that's perfect. But this idea of the democratization too, I've noticed every time something's sold as a democratizing thing, it really just winds up shifting the power more. Like the internet is democratizing and it's open and transparent. Well, transparency, this is another point Luciano makes. Transparency's great for big companies because when all of the data is accessible, no one can compute it except Google. And then you get the AI. And so that I feel like we're always sold democratizing things as a false bill of goods to something that eventually seeds
Yeah.
some kind of essential thing. And you're speculating that the essential thing here is the journey, the mental journey. And Sean's speculating that when you're 13 and you can go to Midjourney and type this in and get the best Zidlasa Beksiński painting you could want, why would you go through all the toil and effort of actually learning your craft? And that is scary for the human psyche.
Yeah.
And Carson, actually, you are engaging this in terms of the story in the second issue of the series. So we should say that Abolition of Man, the first issue, is entirely, a segment of a C.S. Lewis essay that he delivered in the 1940s in terms of the text, and that's essentially your exploratory mode. Essentially, the first section of prompt in terms of engagement, and then Carson wrote the second issue in an attempt to how do you actually use this in a narrative framework. And used a story seed that he had from a long time ago that essentially postulates that when people are made redundant entirely, there will still be jobs for people. The job will just have no actual intrinsic meaning. And so people will still go through and do the motions of whatever it is that they did before, but that it's just shifted the target. I mean, do you think that that's plausible, Dave, that essentially, like, we just need that so much that we might end up in a place where everything is taken care of and you will still work,
Yeah, I mean, Harari again talks about the useless generation when AI takes so many jobs. Now, there's no doubting that AI is going to have an incredibly powerful, good effect in certain number crunching areas of our lives, but the more it takes over from the jobs that we do and find meaning in, even if it's just working at something, providing for the physical act of working and doing something, and we all know that life is completely meaningless, and we're just on this little island in the middle of a meaningless, pitiless universe. So it's down to us in our smaller lives to find that meaning, and we cling on to those meanings. It's one of the parts in the book where I think we should not give up that meaning lightly, and so that we need a degree of fight back if AI is going to chip away at the things in our lives that give us meaning. And so what your question was, do you think it's likely that we'll end up with jobs that are essentially meaningless? I think the powers that be, the real elites, the ones that actually run things, will be delighted with that. It's almost a sort of drone-like existence. I'm not sure that we will get to that. I think there's a human there's a human core that sort of fights that kind of being pushed to one side. Revolutions happen under those sorts of circumstances. I think there was another part of my little wander around and talk to myself, whereas the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like this process of focusing on the end result with none of the effort and stretching your mind and to get there is again the perfect way of keeping people pliant and not thinking and not engaged. If you're not angry about things, moved by things, want to change things, these are all the reasons why people make creative work. If all of that is pushed to one side, it's just about making more and more pictures. This, then this, then this, this, then this, then this, then this, then this, this, then this, and then this. You know what I mean? You're again you're keeping people dumb and disengaged. I think. I can't believe that people will be disengaged, but it's so easy. It's all so beautiful and so engaging and so pretty. The bauble of distraction is so beautiful. It's easy for people to switch off and be happy with just the end result and not putting in the work.
Okay,
Well,
devil's advocate. Eric Hebborn, who is one of the great art forgers of the past century, Carson and I have talked about him a couple times. He had a utilitarian argument for the forgery work that he did, and he essentially said, if I'm capable of creating something that he had a sort of ethic to what he did, in the sense that he never attributed something directly. He would make a work in a master style, and then he would float it out there in an attempt to sell it, and often through intermediaries and such.
Slippery slope there, really.
Right.
Slippery argument.
But his argument was essentially, if I am able to fool people enough that they are willing to buy it without me even giving an attribution for it, and then it becomes part of the oeuvre of this great artist who had a previously limited amount of work, and I have now created additional work that gives pleasure to the people that like the work of that artist, that is worthy of being part of that oeuvre, have I not given more utility to this world, brought more beauty to this world for people who can have that as part of this thing? I'm not saying he's necessarily right, but if these steps, Carson and I were playing. I've been obsessed with the AI's ability to mimic John Singer Sargent, who I've loved his watercolors for forever, and something about it is imminently reducible by this machine in a way that many of the other styles and things that we're interested in are not. So what is there, devil's advocate, is there a downside to having all of a sudden an unlimited amount of John Singer Sargents, however marginal, in the world on whatever topic one wishes? Oh, Dave McKEAN having a picnic painted by John Singer Sargent.
How do you spell his last name? S-A-R?
Yeah, Sargent. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you use the word reducible, and I think obviously that's what I would focus on. It is a reduction. It's only based on, it's an ever reducing pool of work based on a human life. And for me, the thing that gives it value is not just turning a page in a magazine and seeing a Singer Sargent. Oh, another painting in a watercolor style. Yes, he could paint folds of cloth very nicely, turn the page. It's the fact of the man. The man existed. The man existed at a time. He was part of the war. He had a life. These things don't exist in isolation. Everything has a context. And that's what more and more technological advances seem to be doing. And that's certainly what this does. It removes all the context. And the context is it for me. I've seen a lot of people talking about trying to find equivalents. Oh, this is just like, the music industry went through its change to digital and everything. I haven't seen a single one of those equivalents that is correct and that fully understands what the quantum change that this is.
Yeah, no,
it would be the equivalent of having a chip or something that could just sit on your forehead, and you could say in your mind, I'd like a concerto to express autumn and the boats leaving the harbour, and then you just hear it in your room. That would be the equivalent. But that's impossible at the moment. Just having auto-tune and a few other technological advances in music making is not an equivalent. I haven't found an equivalent yet. But for example, in terms of context, thank you for that. I don't know what to think about that.
Carson, what have you done?
What have you done? But I wasn't there. I was not there. I was home on that day. I was not there. In terms of context, a technological advance has been the shift to streaming music online and away from physical albums and that sort of release. And I have two children. My children are now 29, 26. So I've watched them go through this process of shifting cultural landscape. And obviously, I've come from a previous cultural landscape, and I've gone from analog to digital. So I feel quite privileged that I've seen the difference. There are lots of things about the analog world I miss, and lots of things about the digital world I love. So I've seen the change. But one thing I've noticed in the music that my kids listen to, my son in particular, is that it's just individual tracks, and those individual tracks are now excised from their original position in an album. And that album is like taking a chapter out of a novel. It was there for a reason. And even if it's just a collection of songs and it's not a concept album, it did express what that person was thinking at that time, at that point in history, where they were in the world, or where they were in their lives and their careers, all those sorts of things. So it did have a context. And so, of course, they can enjoy those songs. My son enjoys listening to a Joni Mitchell song. But the fact that it does not come with the history of the late 60s and the singer-songwriters in California and the shift of the music industry from corporate to individuals and giving the power back to the musicians. And, all of these things. I mean, you build a novel, a whole book full of stories around the context of a song. And all of that is gone. Now, okay, if that's the world we want, okay. I just want to think about it and just want it understood.
Yeah, music is an interesting platform because the complexity has kept this from being a question so far. It's always still images first, and then music, and then video, just from the nature of the bandwidth of each of these things. So people who might not think this is coming. This is coming. This is coming for your field. That someone wrote an algorithm that would generate sheet music based on a certain era of Mozart. This was in 1988 or 89. And they are fine, little pleasant ditties that sound. But the thing is, if you are a classically trained musician who played every single Mozart etude that was available to you from the age of 12 to 16, like I did, you have that in your head. I could generate, melodies along those lines because he played by a certain kind of rule in this particular type of writing. There's a certain cadence and certain kinds of rules that were there. So this is the easiest reducible form of music, this particular very rule-bound kind of thing. Imagine when this is everything that you can do. You can just say, protest song about Sandy Hook shootings in the style of Bob Dylan, 1963. And you will have every detail right. You'll have the harmonica being too loud right up against the vocal mic and all the spit and everything in it. You'll have the overcompression of the guitar and voice. You'll have the nasal twang and the boyish version of his vocal timbre, and all of those things will be right there. What happens when that happens? I feel like I'm making an analogy because other people don't seem to get it. Like other people don't seem to get this is coming for you.
Yeah,
you value it. This is coming for that too.
I mean, I suppose all I can see from your description of that, and I absolutely agree with you. I think that is entirely not only plausible but almost inevitable because the tech evangelists are determined to chase all these problems down. It's a total unraveling of history, a total unraveling of story, and then we get into the really dark thoughts that I've had about all this. God knows anti-social media has done enough to corrupt our sense of truth and facts and evidence and all of these things that we can build our sense of ourselves in society around. I mean, this is surely another nail in that coffin. Let's just create images that prove that the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre are still alive and they have lives out there. So they obviously were just faking it and actors. I can't, but I mean, apart from people who are just in it, powerful people who are in this to make as much money for themselves while we still have a few years left on this planet before our ignorance about the state of the planet overwhelms us. If they're just in it to make us a quick killing, then they will use tools like that. Those are the people that will use tools like that. Are those the people we want to be writing this narrative?
Yeah.
Pushing this technology, or not questioning this technology, or I don't know what.
Well,
But that's where we're heading. I'm afraid, I've come down the other side of my excitement making prompt into a really dark place, and I don't want to be here. But
yeah.
I'm stuck with it. We can't uninvent it. It is, as you say, coming for all of us. So I want to. All I can do is try and face it with my eyes open, and that involves talking to you, my psychotherapists, this afternoon.
Well, one thing that I noticed reading your book, and after pretty much just finishing our experiments with this, is yours felt like, especially the third chapter, is like this came onto your radar and like, boom, this kind of catastrophic apocalyptic thoughts that you're struggling with is on the page. Whereas our book was like Sean said, the story was something I wrote 20 years ago. And so I felt like this is something I've been shouting about for 20 years. And I've termed it the banal content apocalypse. And I put that in a paper in 2013 that I wrote. And so it was really interesting to see, like, okay, the immediate grappling with it versus the, like, I've been thinking about this for 20 years and how those go against each other. Is that pretty accurate, that this is like, this seems really raw for you?
I think that's really accurate, and I really hit that wall hard. I think you've obviously you've had time to evolve your thoughts about it, and I think that comes across in the book really well. I thought about when I was going through the different issues that you've done. I'd read them all, and I mean, I felt the same way reading it as I do about the whole subject. And in that sense, I thought it evoked the subject and put it out there really effectively. But for a lot of it, I was confused. A lot of some of the thoughts I thought were wonderful, but they tended to be human thoughts. There's a great Socrates quote in there, and that really stayed in my head. The problem of explaining something difficult with something even more difficult, or something like that. It's a fantastic quote. The imagery, especially so in the third one, is it the fourth one? I mean, there's some amazing but deeply disturbing images in there, and I was, they're compelling, aren't they? They're eye candy. They're a sugar rush. They're absolutely, grab your attention. But like everything I've seen, it feels sort of soulless. I'm really sorry I say that. There is a soullessness. There is a soulness at the center, and I think it's in the nature of it. I don't know if it's in the nature of it, because I've now been showing my book to a few people, and I've got all kinds of reactions, and a couple of people I've shown it to. I think are almost repelled by it, and it's not. And they like my work. It's not because it's me. It's because I think it's the nature of the beast. It's the nature of knowing that it's AI. If I'd have given it to them and without any of that information, said, this is just my new book, what do you think? They would probably have come back and said, well, it's not like your usual thing, and I'm not sure I liked it as much as this, but they wouldn't have had this visceral reaction to it. So So I did feel that. The one that really tickled me was the last issue, and I think it was because the images were so abstract, and I just really liked them, and they didn't feel as threatening or like a black hole in the center of them. They felt more like infomercials or something, but they were so abstract and the shapes were so beautiful. I really loved the fifth one.
On that one, I prompted it to do graphic design or infographics.
Yeah, I kind of got that impression.
On the first one, we just put in the sentence and it kicked out the imagery. And I wonder if it's like especially disturbing to you because Midjourney on its own kind of does like bad Dave McKEAN.
I noticed that you said that in your previous interviews.
Carson specifically said to me when he texted me, he said, "This thing is like a shitty Dave McKEAN."
And you said that in your email to me.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say that, Pablo.
But I meant it as a compliment because my immediate reaction was like, okay, either A, it's been trained on all of the spectrum artists, like you said, who I think a lot of them were influenced by you. So you're like at the core of the Midjourney DNA in some kind of sense, or there's something about the on the positive side, the bigger compliment is I thought he is so tapped into kind of the like Jungian archetype of the human psyche. Like that's what has made your art so compelling for so long, that then when you get something that's like averaging out the human psyche, it's like kind of looking like that. I don't know, but I could see especially why you, and that's why your book is so important, I think, is I don't know, like I just the similarity between what Midjourney was spitting out and kind of your past, like I cannot imagine how distressing that would be.
Yes, it was. It really was. But I mentioned in the book, the first thing I did was an album cover for a friend without much thought. And I just I had a vague idea of something and I just typed in some words and it just gave me the album cover. It just spat out my album cover and I couldn't improve on it. I thought it was beautiful. It surprised me and, I thought it was great. And I just plummeted into sort of, I had the strangest feeling that I was dreaming and that I would wake up and that had not happened. It was really, really disturbing. And the day after, I just felt, deeply depressed. And I don't get clinically depressed. I have this kind of depression where I'm outside of it. I know I'm depressed and I know it'll go and I can, concentrate on doing a few things and I'm sure it'll dissipate. It doesn't swamp me out. It's not the kind of depression that's like a clinical depression, but absolutely depressed. And so I didn't know how to deal with that. A friend of mine who did a master's in AI said, "Oh, it probably knows your IP address," and that terrified me even more. I thought, Jesus, that's good. That's enough to turn you into a paranoid schizophrenic. But I've done so many images now that I think actually that was just coincidence. And that first one, I happened to use a few words that lean into the photographic and Photoshop-y work that I do. And it happened to come up with something that folded into that work very well. But I don't think it knows my IP address. I don't think it's doing anything weird. No, I was just going to say, but generally, the nature of a certain branch of my work,
right,
which I would characterize as the stuff between photography and photo collage through to the painted collage and the Photoshoppery stuff that I've done, which is a chunk of my work. It's not everything, but it's a chunk of it. I think actually that is eminently applicable via Midjourney. It's interesting that certain artists like Beksinski my old sci-fi mate Jim Burns and a few of these guys are being constantly used as reference because they have a style that you can just wrap onto anything, just applies to anything. Whereas the things that I really love, I talked previously about book covers and album covers that I've done. I was happy to do them, very happy to. I had a nice time doing them, but they're not really me. They're not really meaningful for me. Whereas the other stuff that is more expressive and is more personal, I have so far not seen anything on Midjourney that's really done that for me, and I'm not sure at the moment I will, but I think they'll chase these problems down. I think almost everything is a process that can be analysed in sufficient complexity and can be chased down to the point where it can do an interpretation of it where you won't necessarily be able to discern the difference. It will be an interpretation. It will be a forgery, like your man, but will we notice the difference? And will an audience care?
Right. Well, a large enough portion of people care. Yeah. I think there's a technical explanation for why that period of your work is so, reproducible or come through here. And I think that you're hitting on it when you're talking about the photo collage element. And essentially, if you think of the things that are the current strengths of the currently aligned Midjourney stuff, essentially masterful use of color and paint, like absolutely masterful, overall image color. I don't even know what to call it. It's not a graphic use of not local color, but a atmospheric color, let's say, plus elements of realism and the photo collage, especially bringing in those elements and the chops of realism, plus the sort of you pushing the boundaries of, is this a realistic image or is this an image that is falling apart in some way or expressive in form? When I think about like cages or something like that, where you are departing from the referenced portions to a abstracted figure, this kind of comes naturally to a system that has no hierarchy, since Midjourney is not a human presence and it doesn't have a sense of facial hierarchy and things like that. It gets these kinds of abstractions naturally, whereas you're using these abstractions for expressive purposes. It's sort of deriving these from the very process that it's using. And I think that might be the sort of uncanny aspect to it. And it might also be why, Bacon is another one who, Francis Bacon comes up in some of these discussions, because even though Bacon's stuff doesn't look like yours, that period of your stuff, I think that there's a similar combination of the masterful painting and the expressive surface and the sort of hierarchical shifts happening. Is that?
Yeah, I think that's all correct. The difference is that when you deform something or distort something, or it's for a reason. It's not just a random effect. And unfortunately, Midjourney, let's face it, is just creating. It's an infinite amount of monkeys, creating an infinite amount of stuff, and it just chunks stuff together. And the fascination is just, what on earth is it going to do next, and the surprise of it. But it's essentially meaningless. It is meaningless. And when we see something that we think is meaningful, we're doing that. It is not doing that.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of, during the last podcast, I was trying to think of an example. If you have two slide projectors, let's simplify Midjourney to two slide projectors that have been loaded up with 1,000 images each, and they're just projecting next to each other, 2 images at a time. And it's just stuff: banana, monkey, this, that, fan, picture of Tuscany, and it throws up a picture of a door and a screwdriver. And I immediately think of Edward de Bono's Lateral Thinking book, and the idea that if you haven't got the key to get through the door, use a screwdriver and take the door off its hinges. Lateral thinking. I did that. The slide projectors don't know Edward de Bono. They don't know any of that. They just put up 2 images. So let's not kid ourselves that Midjourney is creative in that sense.
Yeah.
So I have seen images In fact, there's a couple in here in the book that have really got under my skin. There's one image, and it just, you know, in the context of all this noise, it probably just goes by. But for some reason, it's just really got under my skin. It's that one on the far right there. So all of these images were made by just picking a headline from my newspaper in the morning and feeding it in. And the headline is Labour, that's the British Labour Party, which is the left of centre party. The party says it is now the true party of patriotism and British values, as opposed to the Conservative Party, the right-wing party. But what's happened there, look at that, what's happened there, is it's taken the Union Jack of England, of Great Britain, the UK, and it's taken the red bit in the middle, which is red is the colour of the Labour Party, the red flag, and it's wrapped these figures, the two figures wrapped in the flag. And you know that expression, when you wrap yourself in the flag, you're being particularly patriotic. He wrapped himself in the flag. So it's a kind of a joke. It's a kind of he's trying to tell a joke. That one really got under my skin as how did that happen?
Yeah.
Now I still don't know how much of that interpretation is just me. I brought all that to it, but I can't help but feeling that is a train of thought there somewhere. And I showed it to a friend who did not know the expression wrapping yourself in the flag, and he didn't get anything from that. So, you know, I don't know what to make of it.
Well, it's a bit of like, is it, I guess this is another thing from Luciano's philosophy of information, but he makes a distinction between data, content, and information. And this is like generating endless amounts of content, but it doesn't become information until it has legitimate semantic meaning. And you're saying it still kind of has, we have to bring like the interpretive meaning to it. We have to glean something from it because it doesn't seem to have intent.
It has no intent. No, it has no intent. Well, yeah, I mean, I can, at the moment, I'm not convinced it has intent. Let's put it like that.
When I was 8 years old, my parents moved from a TV set that was about yay big, black and white, rabbit ears on the top, to having cable for the first time. And that's because my mom had gone over to someone else's house and seen MTV for the first time. And she was very excited about this amazing thing. And it turns out that what she enjoyed was not watching MTV, but putting on music that she actually liked and having the picture on with the sound all the way off. And this was her way of engaging with it, because when she got just the music video, not only did she have to put up with the music that she didn't but it also was on the nose. You know, this was like essentially telling her what the content of the lyric was. Whereas when she had this thing being projected, like one stream of like sort of pseudo information combined randomly with the other stream of actual information, that was a very pleasant effect for her. I've thought about that a lot. When you were mentioning the two slide projectors, it's like the ultimate version of that. We've got thousands of slide projectors going at the same time, and some type of like pseudo intelligence, like Chinese box style, like elimination of some of the projectors at different times. I don't know if you guys are both familiar with the Chinese box theory, that basically like any
John Searle
intelligent non-natural intelligent system is essentially like blind to the meaning. And the analogy that's used in that segment is that the AI would be getting Chinese, is like me sitting in a box and getting Chinese symbols coming in one side of it, and then being rewarded when I put out the correct other, symbol on the other side. And gradually I learn which symbol I'm supposed to put in through the box. And I just pass the symbols, but I never actually engage with them semantically. It's all just done through a system of gradually learning which one relates to the previous one.
And having sat inside the box with a dictionary is basically the thought experiment. But the counter argument to that, though, is that it's not you that has the intelligence, but the system of you and the dictionary, and the box understands Chinese potentially. That's one of the counters to John Searle.
Yeah.
Sorry.
the simple thing that occurred to me with your friend and MTV pictures and different music is the reason why she liked it is because she's involved. She is invited to be creative at that point. I think, you know, a lot of the media, a lot of the things that I like and the things that I've done, the reason why I like comics is because there's no sound. You know, there's no movement. These things are missing. So it's down to me to provide 50% of the experience by drawing pictures and writing a narrative that goes into your mind, and then inviting you. If I can draw well enough, I hope you'll start to get a sense of how these people move and how they talk. And if I've written well enough, I hope you'll get a sense of how they speak, and you start to hear those voices in your head. And if I've arranged the page and told the story well enough, you start to get a sense of the motion on the page, and whether it's fast moving or whether it's pastoral and slow, or, you know, this is the pleasure. This is, and then you're engaged. As the reader of a comic, you're engaged. You're bringing all that to it. That's why it's so powerful. That's why I think people love comics. It's why people love radio, because there's no pictures. You close your eyes and you see them in your head, or, you know, the people walking in the street, the sound of the birds, and people talking. You imagine what they look like. You're invited to be creative. It's generous. You're invited to be part of the creative experience. The more you just switch off, and when you're creative, you become engaged. You start to think, and then, from a political point of view, you become dangerous because you're engaged. Yeah. If the more you're encouraged just to switch that off, just take the end result. You know, don't think about the film. Just sit back in your seat and your popcorn. You get all the sound, all the pictures, everything, full sensory experience hitting you. Fine. Midjourney as well. End result. Just concentrate on the end result. Then the next one. Then the next one. Then the next one. Don't think. That. Now, as I'm saying this, I can hear myself moaning, and and I don't want to minimize the pleasure that I'm sure thousands right now of people are getting by tapping away and seeing these weird and wonderful images coming out of the computers. I'm sure, I really don't want to say that they shouldn't do that. Of course they should. It's another diversion in life. It's another entertainment. It's another pleasurable thing to do. Fine. It's absolutely fine. I really don't want to. I'm not trying to, spoil the party. I'm just trying to say all of these positives come with a negative. Let's just try and, for a moment, think about the downside of this, or the implications of this, or the deeper resonances of this. That's all.
Dave, do you, I get the sense from Cages, which is one of my all-time favorite, that you play music as well.
Yep.
I
play piano.
You're so about jazz and improvisation versus like the feeling of blues versus the technicality of jazz in that book is a big argument. Do you get a sense? No, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, what's the question?
You're talking about the pleasure of the next. One thing that me and Sean have talked about a lot, and that I always struggle with as an artist and a painter, is I feel like with art, there's no magic moment in the same way that there is with music. Like, especially when you're improvising, you're in the moment and you're now, and it's happening. Or if it's a song that you wrote 10 years ago, but you're playing it with an audience, there's like a presence to it. For me, at least, I don't know for you, but when I'm painting, especially, drawing's faster, so it's a little bit more magic, but painting so slow, and eventually you put on the last stroke and you step back and you're like, I'm done. But the thing materializes so slowly that it's the labor that you're talking about that's going to be missing. But I always kind of think, man, I wish I would have been a musician, because it's magic all the time. And it seems like Midjourney, when I first started playing with it, I was like, oh my God, I'm making art with magic now, because it just shows up. Boom. Wow, I'm excited. And I didn't have that process. And it seems like you're speculating that is part of the danger of it. It's part of like the siren song of the Midjourney, is that it's like putting magic into something that should be harder. but it's tempting because music
Yeah.
has that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, given two pathways to get to where you want to be, the short, easy one or the long, difficult, windy one, it's very easy just to go for the short one. You want to be over there, let's just do that. It's whether you believe, and whether it's a belief system or whether it's actually quantifiably true in any sense in terms of mental health or societal stability, that actually it's the long, windy journeys that test us and that build us and that we learn from, and that we realize that in the end, the destination wasn't the point. It was to experience all these things. We're not just spat out in the world to organize our own funerals, are we? You know, that's the end result. That's the end. That's the end of all of us. That is the end of all of us to sit in a coffin. That's not what we're here for. It's to experience this weird, circuitous life along the way. That's where I think the important stuff is.
Go ahead, Sean.
When you play, do you play with a group, or do you play primarily solo? Give me some context for this.
Both. I mean, I play piano, and so in school and art school, I played in bands, and it was. And when I had piano lessons when I was very young, and I got to the point where I could naturally play to a point. And if I wanted to get any better, I'd start to really have to put the work in. And like a lot of kids, I was lazy, and you know, it started to seem like more work than I was getting back from it. But my parents found me a jazz teacher, and he just got me through that couple of difficult years. More interesting music. He was a nice guy. He was very playful, and I liked the way he played. And it just got me through that difficult bit where you start to get something back for the work that you're putting in. And then I got a trio together, and I started playing with other people. And as soon as you experience that pleasure of making an art form in the present tense, then that's it. I'm hooked. And then I put as much work in as was necessary. And the more work I've put into it, and the more struggle I put into and tested myself, the more I've got out of everything. I mean, that's been my mantra, really. And that's why I've ended up doing lots of different things. I mean, I enjoyed, I didn't want to be a film director. I don't want that. That's the end result of having some career as a film director is not the point. I just wanted the experience of making a film, the actual doing of it. To be honest, when it was done, I was finished. I didn't want to do the publicity or the walk down the red carpet or any of that kind of stuff. I just wanted the fun of doing it and the experience of working with actors for the first time, or, you know, doing a sound mix for the first time, or writing music or cutting film to music, and all of those processes along the way. That was the joy of it. And I learnt so much. I think I'm a better person for doing all of those things because I've just learned so much, and you know, that's the point of it. Again, I just have to keep on saying it's not about the end result. It's about.
I think some of our discomfort, and part of the reason I was mentioning, like, I've been grappling with this for 20 years, and it seems like you've been grappling with it for 20 days, but we're both kind of still in the same spot, like, you know, with how we feel about it, and I think one of the things, I mean, obviously the core of your concern is the temptation to not work anymore, to earn it. And I think that just comes down to and so I wonder where you stand on this, but a skepticism about the majority of people being willing to put in that work or not. When COVID hit, to me, it was a kind of proof. Well, I guess before that, people started talking about universal basic income. This is a great idea. And I said, no, this is a terrible idea, because most people, when you just let them have all day, like, everyone says, well, everyone's going to be creative and they're going to go do all this stuff. And I was like, no, it's really hard to make yourself get up and push and work. And like you just said, you had to have that something help you get over how hard it is to get good at something. Most people, it maybe I'm just bleak, but I don't think most people have that. I don't think most people are going to sit around and get better at painting just because they don't have to go to a job. There will be some people who will take advantage of that. And then COVID, when that hit, I was like, this is going to be proof of concept, because everyone stayed home for a month. And I told my partner, I said, look, everyone's got like 3 weeks of like needing to clean out the gutters and arranging their photo collection and reading those couple books. But by week 4, people are going to be going ape shit. And like, sure enough, a month in, there was like people riding quads around in like our little cul-de-sac. And so I wondered like where you stand on that. Like, are you hopeful that the majority of people do have that work ethic in them if they're left alone, or is the majority of human kind of inclination going to leave us to like Wall-E? I don't know if you've seen the movie, but where they're all these blobs in these chairs sucking down juice and watching shows on their screen.
You have to pick one of these 2 options.
Yeah, I have to pick one of 2.
Your thoughts on that, because I think that's behind that's the thing that's behind the real worry is, if you take away the need to work, how many people are going to choose to do it for the human satisfaction of it, and how many people are going to check out?
Yes, so I think I've got sort of 2 levels to my worry. Well, one is simply personal. It's selfish. It's how, you know, what impact does this have on me personally? And that's easier to see. I think a sizable chunk of what I do is immediately redundant. There's absolutely no reason why anybody would bother to commission an illustrator to make a book cover or an album cover when they can just type a few words in and not only get it, but feed an increasingly rapacious marketing department who only know what they like when they see it, and therefore want 50 finished comps from which they will choose one. Well, now they can have an infinite amount of finished comps. So the financial imperative of that, and the sort of raw capitalist, pressure of that will happen. So I've got to deal with that. And so that's why I'm sort of immediately refocusing on things that I think I can still hold on to and that AI is further away from. And maybe I'll get another couple of decades out of a career before that gets overwritten. But the bigger anxiety is wider than that, and part of it is educational. So I don't teach, but I occasionally do go and give lectures and do exterior assessing at art schools, things like that. And so there's that component there. And that's partly selfish. I'm interested to know what the generation that are going through now are thinking and how they're responding to the world. And I get a lot from that. And it's partly because having done 35 years of living a creative life, I've learned a couple of things along the way. And certainly the people that I loved had imparted their lessons to me. When I was in art school, I went to a lecture by Marshall Arrisman, who's an amazing, just died, unfortunately, an amazing American illustrator and teacher. I took a huge amount from him. Milton Glaser was another. There were a few. And so if I could help in some way with others down the road, great. That seems to be part of the agreement of going into this kind of walk of life. You pass it on. And so I now don't know what to say to anybody. The fields of creative endeavor who usually come to talk to me, the illustrators, designers or whatever, everything they do is now easily done by AI, pretty much. And so I don't know where that leaves art education at all.
Yeah, as a professor of art, I'm terrified.
And then wider than that, I don't. What do you say? And then wider than that, I've been reading a wonderful book called Heavy Light by Horatio Clare. Horatio Clare's a writer and broadcaster, traveler, but has wrestled with mental illness and had a terrible manic phase and was sectioned and spent a month in a mental institution. And then, so the book is, a third of the book is inside his mind during his mania, which is a terrifying third of the book. A third of the book is inside the institution and dealing with the various authorities and systems that he finds himself within. And the final third of the book is coming out of that as a sane, treated person, but looking at the systems that are there and realizing that the medication that he was on was useless and the evidence to support it was negligible, because it's there just to tick boxes and to support big medical institutions. And actually, what helped was a much more holistic view of him as a person. So he started to see a clinician at Guy's Hospital whose first point of attack was not trying to categorize his specific mental illness, bipolar, ADHD, or any of these other categories, for which there is a pill. Tick, box ticked, now go away. It's who are you as a person? What are your anxieties? What are you thinking? What do you do? Much more about the person. And all of the treatments, many of the treatments came down to creative endeavor, upping the art in your life, the creativity in your life, writing in your life, being able to express yourself. A lot of anxieties we feel is because we feel powerless. Well, if you make things, you don't feel powerless. You are in control of that thing that you're making. All of those sorts of things are at the source of a sort of small revolution going on in psychotherapy at the moment. That is the element that I'm concerned about with these kinds of advances. It's not about doing a book cover or finding an end result. It's about mental health. It's about finding purpose in your life and a reason to carry on in a pitiless universe. These are the important things. And these are the things that take work and take the long, windy road and take challenging yourself and learning along the way and doing it. It's not about the end result.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine that you can supplant any of those things. Like, what does it look like when you take away the purpose that we have? Our method of generating purpose. When you remove that, I mean, you really just you're absolutely. I mean, you're utterly convincing to me that this is a future of anxiety and. I don't even know. Unsettled. Well, I mean, I guess I can just know how I feel if I go on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. Again, as I'm whining at you about this, I can hear thousands of people out there going, "You're ridiculous. Of course, people will continue to draw and make things. This will just slot into our lives as another technological advance like Photoshop and all these things." And on the one hand, I think you're right to think that. I think that is to a degree correct. And I've noticed that within my own work here. I've done a variety of other work apart from just the book prompt. I've done a few other things using Midjourney, and I've used it to generate raw materials for me. And at that level, it feels like instead of I think today I was trying to generate a Roman sort of Caesar face made out of metal. Well, I could probably find some old reference material online for that, or I'd go to the library, find a book of Roman sculpture, and I could do that. Or I could make something out of clay, paint it gold. I mean, these are all the solutions that I've used in the past. Are you going to make me one now? Are you? Thank you.
Yeah. Have you played with DALL-E?
Yeah.
Don't. But essentially, it was sort of replacing that. That was a kind of Photoshop enabling. It just it replaced my slog of going to find reference material or making a clay mask and painting it gold with an image that I could use within the context of a painted image or a created image of myself.
Right.
And I still felt guilty doing it. I still felt like I was cheating, essentially cheating. But, you know, that's just me. And thank you very much. Excellent.
Just so people understand how terrifying this is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I was after. Thank you. And then, but I did feel like I was working with it, and it was a tool, and there was a balance there, I would say, that I didn't feel when I just typed in a few words and got a finished piece of work out. Okay. So I just want to finish this thought for the thousands of people out there who are saying I'm being ridiculous, and people will continue to draw and paint. So in that sense, that's correct. It will fold into certain people's work processes. But my worry is that I'm thinking sort of beyond today and beyond 6 months. What kind of society are we facing in 5 years' time or 20 years' time, if we're still around? And I fundamentally disagree that this is just another technical step up like Photoshop or auto-tune. I don't think that's the case. I think all of the previous technological advances we've seen are enabling, but you have to still do the work, and you still have to have an aesthetic judgment. You still have to do this. It can make things easier. Instead of mastering darkroom techniques and doing multiple exposures, you can just put it into layers and interact with them. Hugely powerful, doing essentially the same thing. I feel sorry for the generation of darkroom technicians now put out of work, but that's an enabling tool. It's not creating the content. It's not doing the thinking for you. You're still manipulating the image to get to what you want. This is totally different. This is not a fishing rod that recognizes that you caught a fish and applies exactly the right tension on it to hook it. This is a chip that you put on your head and think fish, and the thing just lands on your plate. That's the difference.
Yeah.
There is no physical exercise involved. There's no camaraderie of going out with your fishing mates. There's no being in the fresh air. There's no knowing where the fish are and getting to know the nature of how fish, there's a whole world there of being a fisherman. I know this is a strange analogy, I'm sorry. But there's a whole world going on there that essentially is our purpose for living. People build reasons to exist around being a fisherman or, playing football or something like this. This is not that. This is cutting out all of that and just getting to the end result, which is fish on the plate.
And that's the kind of ontological decentering that I'm talking about, where you're literally we occupied a certain space, and Photoshop didn't decenter us from that space, as some kind of unique being that we are. And this is decentering us from that space, and we're going to have to grapple with our place in the universe in the same way that we did when we realized that we were just animals, or when we realized that we weren't the center of the universe, or when we realized that we had a subconscious. And that's where, Sean, I think your idea of utility is going to be really important to the conversation, because there is the utility of having the image, but that is far inferior to the utility of the process that Dave is talking about. And so I think the cultural conversation needs to shift to the utility of producing the art, and within that, we're going to have to realize that, look, there's an infinite amount of images. So if the utility of looking at images goes away, the financial incentives and the museums and all of the kind of structures that we have that incentivize going through the process are potentially going to go away. So we're going to have to reshift the incentive structures for the utility of making, and that's terrifying.
Yeah,
because A, no one's talking about it. B, what does that look like? Like what you don't have a museum show, you're not getting paid to do that. I agree with you. I've been telling people, like, nobody is making album covers anymore. That's dead.
It's gone.
That's
Total,
that was
single
gone
image,
2 months
single
ago.
image illustration. Yeah.
So
totally
what
gone.
is our what is our societal infrastructure then to help incentivize that other utility, which isn't talked about as much?
I can postulate a future that is plausible for the performing artist, and this is why I was asking you about your piano playing, because my wife and I were both at various points professional musicians, in the sense that was the only thing we did for our livings, and we lived through the democratization of music, where all of a sudden you couldn't sell an album because people were not interested anymore. And the way that we dealt with that at the time was street performing, because people walked by us and had a visceral experience with seeing the two of us unamplified, playing instruments and singing at the same time, and having an emotional reaction to a performance in a way that was surprising and engaging and unique. And they wanted some piece of that. And so they took a piece of us with them when they left. Of course, that's all gone now because no one has cash anymore. And the law prohibits it in various municipalities and things like that. But I can imagine a future in which someone who, let's say 10 years from now, all these problems, by the way, once again, talking to the skeptics, are going to be resolved. All the technical problems that we talk about with lack of image hierarchy, it can't do line art because it can't. It does this terrible, Charles Dana Gibson is still safe right now if he were alive. But putting that aside, you can imagine a future in which the only people who still paint are essentially the equivalent of Olympic athletes. They show up to the venue and they do like time challenges with each other. It's essentially the equivalent to hot dog eating contests or skeet shooting or something like that. And Dave, you can this is 2043. You can roll up to the event and get out and do a timed portrait where you bring up an oil all the way from rough to completion in a 4-hour window, and every single thing is filmed by every angle, so everyone can prove that you're actually the progenitor of this artwork. Because you as author, that must be authenticated and verified, and everyone watches it in a time lapse that takes 15 seconds because that's their amount of
bleak.
Yeah,
bleak.
Until we get an AI system that creates footage of that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It has to be live.
You guys got to take it further. I can't have a little bit of hope.
Yeah, well, to be honest, that is really bleak. My life as a performing monkey. But I'm clinging on to this desire that we have for meaning. All the work that I love is there for a reason. It expressed something. It's not the endless stuff that you see in Spectrum. I'll be honest, I never really liked that stuff anyway. Hugely admiring of technical ability to be able to paint like that and do those things. Absolutely. And God knows there are a few artists who are in that swim who have built a world for themselves and are compelling. I'd even say Beksinski was one. I mean, he lived in a blighted part of Middle Europe, and I think a lot of what he went through went into those paintings. It saddens me to see them now used as filters, stripped of their context for this reason. But a lot of that stuff is meaningless to me anyway. But the work that I really love is full of meaning, and I don't see that yet coming out of AI, because all of that is essentially meaningless. Any meaning that's there is brought to the party by we humans. It's not implicit in the work, and that's what I love. This transference of meaning. An artist feels something and wants to shout out into the void. I feel this. I've noticed this. Have you seen this? Does this make you angry as well? Does this move you as well? And you connect, and that connection, that empathy. Art is an empathy machine. There's a line in my Black Dog book. That's the point of it. That's the point of it. Not an infinite amount of pretty pictures. And the pretty pictureness of it is a law of diminishing returns. At the moment, it's still churning them out, and you go, oh, another one, oh, another one, oh, amazing, another one, oh, another one. Well, you can only do that for another, how long? 6 months? How long does that little sugar rush last before it's just an infinite amount of those things, and it becomes meaningless? There was a line in the book about smoothing out the plane of images to sort of a median beige of what's out there in the world. And that's a sort of metaphor. It's obviously not, I don't literally mean that, but metaphorically, that's what I mean. It's just so much stuff, an infinite amount of those images, those meaningless images. What's to connect to? It's not surprising anymore. It's not astonishing anymore. It doesn't give you a sugar rush anymore.
And it
So what are you left with?
I think we've both worried too that it devalues what came before. Like Sean has said, when you've seen so many of these, what's the appeal of a Magritte anymore, or a Dali? You know, and that's what I mean when I say banal content apocalypse, is that the content, there's so much content that all content becomes banal, and that really is an apocalypse of a sort, and is distressing. But on a hopeful note, I think we're all looking for, how do we keep going? I'm really glad that we work in comics, because I think that one's not going to get touched for a while,
as you'll see by the amount of name tags that are in our second and third issue. Well, Jasper, yes, Charisse.
Yes. I did notice that, actually.
and how to manage the implication between panels and stuff. So I think you're right that, like, the financial stuff of like being able to do an album cover, that's under attack, but the creative expressive part, and you know, being comic artists at heart, all of us, I think we still have like this little, okay, it's probably coming, but that's a trickier problem. And I feel comfortable with that. And I've had people ask me about doing paintings, and I'm like, dude, I don't think I'm ever going to paint again, because painting is a lot of hard work for me to make one image that I've always felt kind of lacks the communicative richness of a narrative anyways. And I'm kind of skeptical of that. But
if you want to keep going for another 10 years, all you got to do is write a fantastic story that is also incredibly unique, and also draw like Alex Raymond and or Charles Dana Gibson, and make sure that you finish everything with a really unfashionably complex line art that is unable to be mimicked by the machines, because they have no idea how to do it. And that's going to keep you going for a while.
Yeah.
What was the last one? I'm just writing this down, because I will need
the line art.
I will need to know what to do.
But I don't even think like you could take away all of that. You could use the AI to make your comics, but you still need to be, and it's really difficult to get it to do what you want it to do. It's really good if you just give it a poem and it will illustrate it perfectly. But if you say, I want, like Sean wrote a scene of a guy walking down the hallway, and in the background there's another guy in like a coffin with his face showing through a window, and someone's like handing him a comic book, and like that there was absolutely no way to get the AI to do that. Did you comp those? I did want to ask that, actually. Are any of the panels composited, or did you actually finally get the AI to do all of those things in one picture?
I think two panels in issue 3 have composites, right?
Okay.
But the only things that are composited is Sean wanted like posters.
Yep.
Yeah, like he wanted like Van Gogh and Rocky and stuff. So I generated those separately and composted them in. But other than that, untouched. So I just had to shift the narrative around the AI's inability. Like that scene disappeared.
Yeah, that scene went to the toilet. Carson took that lovely script page and he balled it up and he flushed it down the toilet, and that's how he illustrated that one.
The best I could do is have them walk by and kind of glare at each other, like two guys glaring. But even if you could get the images you want, you'd still have to arrange them and put them in order, and someone could illustrate the book with an AI, but they would still be controlling the flow like we did in issue 2 and 3. You'd still have to write it and control it. And so I think even if it, and this is something I want to talk about maybe in a couple statements later, but that inability to deal with line work fascinates me as well. So, that is another kind of boundary it hasn't accomplished yet.
Carson and I were
Yeah,
arguing about whether that's just a random thing or whether there's actually something more complex and or more human and less reducible about the propensity to line. It's just terrible, you know.
yeah, it is. But I think it depends on the line, on the nature of the drawing.
Okay.
So what I could think of as a good drawing is not necessarily what the comic book industry, for example, thinks of as a good drawing. I think the kind of drawing that you get in comic books generally, I'm talking about sort of mainstream American comic books, they are kind of templated, and I do think that those kinds of drawings, which is essentially a sort of animator's template moved around a bit,
Right.
With the same sort of lines, same sort of these are dreadful, Jesus.
Yeah.
The same, oh, man, the same sort of lines used to express the same sort of things over and over and over again.
Okay.
I think that's complicated, but I think that is trackable, and I think AI will be able to do that. But
Okay.
what I think of as a good drawing, for starters, is an act of observation and interpretation and understanding. And all of those things are just really hard to track because they all come with contexts that AI is just not very good at, as far as I can tell. If I'm trying to draw a portrait of somebody, yes, to a degree, I'm trying to make marks on the paper that represent the proportions of the face and the shape of the face, those sort of basic things that a photograph would pick up. But it's much more than that that's going on. I'm trying to express in a line, which is a completely different thing, or black line on white paper, than this sort of ball of light in front of me, light and shadow in front of me. It's hugely interpretive. And also, the person has a history. Do I know the person? What's their expression like? There's a whole world of contexts going on with that person and the way they're sitting and the effect of gravity on them and the effect of light hitting them and the shadows and all of the things that are going on there and who they are and what they're thinking. And then who I am and what I'm thinking and my history that I bring to it and my prejudices and my preferences and all those sorts of things. So it's a massively complicated neural net of forces going on before I've made a mark. And then you make a mark and the next mark is a response to that mark and the thing and the person in front of you. I mean, it just gets more and more complicated, and trying to track all of those decisions and the histories of all those decisions. Maybe it's possible with a sufficiently complex AI, neural system. Certainly at the moment, I haven't seen anything to touch it. It's the difference between intelligence and sentience, I think. I think we've made a lot of strides, computers' intelligence, but absolutely no strides with their sentience. We're still at absolute zero there.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. It was a thought that came up as I was wandering around for my book. Just to come back to plugging my book.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
I didn't mean to.
Buy the damn book, guys.
I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
I want you to.
Yeah.
Was the difference in thinking, and this book, The Artist in the Machine, every single definition seemed to equate brains with computers, and in a very simple way. Yes, they're more complicated, but if we can build a sufficiently complex computer, because the quote at the beginning, because human brains are bound by the laws of physics, they're not outside the laws of physics, therefore eventually an AI will be able to do anything that a brain can do. And that has a sort of humbling logic to it, but it doesn't really represent my experience living inside this one. I think it came up as a train of thought, and that's why it went in the book, that if I save off a file or an image in my computer and look at it again in 20 years' time, it's identical. It's because it's just an arrangement of pixels expressed in ones and zeros and values. Whereas every single thing that's ever gone into my head, an observation, an image, a thought, word, everything, every single thing. When I try and retrieve it the next day, let alone in 10 years' time, it's changed because it's like falling into an ocean of, it's forced to react to everything else around it. It's affected by everything else coming in on top of it and everything that came up before it. It gets misremembered. It's a liquid way of thinking. It's the only way I can express it. It's not a hard binary black and white ones and zeros way of thinking. It's a strange liquid way of thinking. And maybe only out of a liquid way of thinking will sentience emerge, whatever that turns out to be. Now, that's purely I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an expert. I'm certainly not an expert in AI. I'm not a programmer. But that's my experience living on the inside. It doesn't, my brain, does not function like a computer. It doesn't doesn't recapitulate identical things. Everything is affected by everything else.
Well, and some of that is like, even if you had even if the neural network matched the complexity of the brain, it doesn't have a stomach ache that day. And that's part of the liquidity that you're talking about, I think, is the activeness in the world and the feedback of a body. Like, we're not just a brain. I don't buy this, like I could take my brain in a vat.
And that you'd be the same somehow. Yeah, you put that to lie right in the third section of your book. I mean, you are literally going out and experiencing the world in a visceral way. You are not just you're not just a brain in a jar. You're not just a series of reactions. You have stimuli all the time bombarding you, and you have a give and take between your body and synthesis of those sensations.
But in theory, I think all of those sensations could be inputted into the brain. Let's go science fiction 2,000 years in the future. You could simulate all of those sensations in the brain. They are just impulses going into the brain. It's information going into the brain. I think my point is that the way our brains process that information and deal with that information is fundamentally different from the way that a computer does.
Yeah.
And I don't buy this direct analogy that seems to be at the root of all AI work at the moment.
Yeah, you'd have to like somehow train the neural network to forget and misremember, and like there'd have to be just some kind of feedback, and I don't know. It seems very unlikely to me.
I don't know. I don't know whether simply having enough computing power will create the kind of environment that goes on in the brain. I just don't know. And I don't think anybody does at the moment, because I think the nature of sentience is still mysterious. As far as I know, it's still really mysterious. We've got a lot of information about which parts of the brain light up doing, equivalent of certain inputs and certain things going on. We know a lot more about the way the brain works than we used to. But exactly what the nature of sentience is, I don't think we're very far with that.
And like, technically, it's an unanswerable question, which is like when Alan Turing wrote his paper in the 30s, he said, well, you can't even ask that question. The most that you can ask is, can it do this task? And that's why the AI people have focused on, like, well, can you have a conversation with it through text and be convinced that a human, then you pass the Turing test. Now we've passed the Turing test for, can you make an image with the competency of a painter? Like, we can do that. And so the real like worries aren't the worries of when is the Terminator gonna come enslave us. The real worry is these decentralizing things and how society accommodates the decentralization of those targeted domains. Like, okay, it can beat a chess player now, it can beat a painter now, it can beat and what do we do with that?
Yes, and I don't think we understand the nature of that decentralization either. I think if it was something like Photoshop putting certain jobs out of work is something you can kind of get your hands around. You understand that, whereas this is just too big a change and a societal push, or some huge force to really understand where we're going to end up with. That's my worry. That's the point of you know, these sessions with you. I hope we can do this every week, because this has been hugely valuable for me.
we would be through the moon.
I had to tell you, I have an hourly rate.
Okay.
I don't know if you're,
See,
you know.
now we get to the nitty gritty of all of this.
This is how artists, right?
This is why you dragged me into this.
Yeah.
I don't know how far, you know, how much longer you want to chat. I have one thing I just wanted to throw out there. How do you think this relates to the art world? Because it seems to me that the art world has been down this strange. I mean, on the if you're skeptical about it, you would say dead end, conceptual dead end, and if you're positive about it, you would say this is the current conversation, the exciting current conversation of what art is. Since Marcel Duchamp decided that.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not very current. Duchamp was Duchamp is the articulation of before and after, right?
He is.
And that's like 100 some odd years old now.
It is. So deciding that whatever an artist does is therefore art because an artist did it was his idea. The irony being that he came up with that as a way of naysaying that. I mean, he was trying to dismiss that idea, but it was such a powerful idea, and you can see why. I mean, suddenly, you know, you don't have to draw and paint anymore. You don't actually have to put the work in anymore. Does this conversation sound familiar? You can just you can just pick an object up off the floor, and so long as you've got a business card with artist on it, and you can convince a gullible, money hungry fine art system to put it in the gallery and give it kudos and gravitas because it is now in a large white space. There's nothing intrinsic about the object anymore. It's just that strange belief system that is about money, as far as I can tell, but it's about, you know, keeping that strange belief system in operation. Bananas. It seems to have, it has so many parallels with arguments that I've been going over with myself on this, and so many parallels in the functioning of it. I mean, there's just many of the most renowned artists at the moment don't actually make anything. They think of something and then they just, you know, instead of typing a few words into Midjourney, they give it to a bunch of highly accomplished painters or sculptors and they make it for them. And they're anonymous. They're not allowed to sign it or be known, or be known. And it's signed by the person that provoked that or prompted that, to keep it in the current parlance. And this is it. This is the end result. It seems to me a sort of completely corrupted system about to fall. I mean, I think it's a bubble that's about to burst.
Oddly, this might burst it because it's maybe like this could take down, like if people no longer care to go look at Magritte, then they're not caring to go to the museum.
No.
And you said in your introduction to the book, you asked this exact question, right, about the confluence of the AI and conceptual art.
Yeah. Yes, and I forgot it was there. Sorry, it's all gone by so fast. I forgot it was there. But yeah.
But that was a huge light bulb for me where I went, oh shit, like he's right, like exactly right. And me and Sean have already kind of approached, like one thing that Sean did that I thought was really, really smart was he took one of the pictures and put it into Google image search. So he like reverse engineered it. And I thought, okay, well, that's a whole career now as a conceptual artist. You know, like this infinite navel gaze loop that conceptual art put the art world into.
Right. If you accept the premise that that art can be entirely in the quote unquote conception, as if thinking of, hey, I saw a photo of these cute balloon animal dogs. What if those were giant and made of glass? Here, let me paint. Let me pay my poorly paid, extremely skilled team in China to manufacture these for me now. If you accept that that person, who will not be named, is the progenitor of this object, then what makes them not the progenitor of the image that they make in Midjourney? Why is it not? If I type in, butterfly woman taking a bath with spaghetti strands coming down on her, and that's, there's my art. Now the question is, how much of the previous of that market has been solely held up by, buoyed by the interests to money launder and things like that. And if those same interests have found better uses for their money laundering, so for instance, Bitcoin and other different types of things like that,
NFTs.
Exactly. All of those other sources of potential money laundering might be more competitive. That might be the death blow to the fine arts movement. Or, like I said, Damien Hirst is, or I should say somebody who's I don't have any respect for. Fill in your fine arts you don't have any respect for. Is sitting down and typing something out and then printing it out and giving a one-of-one edition on there and then minting themselves $15,000 for 5 seconds worth of work. It seems like it fits perfectly into that. The question is just whether or not the existing people will continue to be the only ones who benefits it, because the economics of it are unavoidable. That's another thing that is a long-term thing that Carson and I have come back to a lot, is in art there are economic movements, and as soon as something that was once very difficult became easy, you see a proliferation of that thing until the market has reached saturation and people reverse course. So whether it's using royal blue, and when blue had to be lapis lazuli that was ground down, and so royal blue only appeared in the paintings of royalty, but then as soon as they had synthetic blues that met that same kind of color luster standard, that dissipated. Photoshop put a lot of people who had tremendous skills in the spectrum sort of side of things out of business. That sort of glossy doorknob. I mean, gradients. Even something as simple as a gradient. Gradients were incredibly hard to do with physical media. As soon as gradients were available through a computer, it's like, do you really want that on your thing anymore? Because it oversaturates. So, I mean, are we? It's possible that we're going to reach that saturation point with this type of image, and the crudest possible, drawing that's as far as you can get, or the most truthful, I don't know, is going to be the thing that has some kind of cachet again. But I'm not hopeful on that front.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose at the end of the day, it seemed to me that the art, I think you're right, that the power of money, and there's just so much to lose from letting that belief system
Expire.
The emperor's new clothes really be revealed. That's a very powerful system that will take some pushing over, but this is a very powerful system. This is a very powerful technology, and the implications of it could easily do that. I think it's in the interests of the cabal of galleries and museums and agents and all those people to keep the pool of the anointed, the true artists who can pick the pen of art and blow it up. And this one's green, so we're going to make it orange, and blow it up so that it's 100 feet tall and pointed in the ground as a statement against the inevitable decline of agriculture in mechanized society. I mean, we could sit here all day and come up with this bullshit, but there is a point where there's a great cartoon. Who's the cartoonist? I can't remember his name. Brilliant cartoonist. I'll remember in a minute. But he's got a field of cows. That's what reminded me of it. It's a field of cows, and one of the cows is looking up, going, "Hang on, this is grass. We've been eating grass." So it's gonna take it's gonna take something big, and this is big. AI is big to finally burst that bubble of. It's a belief system.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, but the people who are working in that area and part of that conversation, who genuinely have something to say. And I mean, I'm thinking of Ai Weiwei or something like, with his circumstance, being a dissident from China. He will continue, because the power of what he has to say and communicate will continue. But all of the charlatans who are along for the ride and realize they're onto a tasty little earner and they don't have to actually do any work for it and will never be challenged, they will finally be let go.
Well, I think they'll be
and
happy
art will
with
become
this.
something else.
They'll be happy with this. They'll shift into this in the NFT space and figure out a way to capitalize on that. And I think a lot of the galleries and stuff they already are.
Yeah.
Like, and it's equally gate kept. Like, I wanted to do NFT projects because the NFT blockchain technology would have allowed me to talk about a lot of the things that I've been trying to talk about in a much more visceral way. And I just I still can't. I can't get connected into that. So it's equally gate kept already. I think more interesting, and you've hinted at this a couple times, like this idea of things getting out of the box too soon, and like, oh, it's fine to put it over here and kind of run it as an experiment on a computer, but now you're letting it out into the public without really thinking about it. I thought that about the art world, art and philosophy, which is my background and my training. I think function really great as sandbox computers. It's like you can make the virus, you can make the program on the sandbox computer and run it and see what it does. And that's the point where we should do it. And I feel like Duchamp was doing that, right? He was running this amazing kind of thought experiment. The problem is it's not a sandbox computer. It's an entirely porous membrane. And so all of the wonderful thought experiments of postmodernism that start really with Duchamp and doesn't get solidified in philosophy until the 50s. And then in philosophy and academia, that's like its own little sandbox that doesn't really start impacting the real world until starting in the 60s, but really in the 90s, probably. That shit's all out of the sandbox now, and out of the sandbox way too early. And now we've got fake news, post-truth society, and this feels like that same thing. It should be in some kind of sandbox environment, and it's in the world.
Be a sealed environment. Yeah, it's difficult to do that. I mean, it's a bit like life will find a way. These ideas will always seep out into wider society. I suppose, realistically, my anxieties are most big changes are evolutionary, or most big changes so far, pre-digital, I would say, have been evolutionary, and they've been at a human level of change. I'm sure there'd be many people who disagree with that from a historical point of view, but we've been able to grapple with them. We've been able to get a sense of where we're going and at least plan to a degree and try and mitigate the worst excesses of the downside. Whereas I think the changes now are so fast we can't keep up. So, and I think also, I'm sorry, just to finish the thought.
No, my bad.
I think that we've now seen the result of these experiments getting out, or these viruses getting out into society, with the first few big technological changes to the way we deal with each other. To at least draw some lessons from that. But we just don't seem to draw any lessons. We keep on saying, fantastic, it's amazing. Look at all this amazing thing. Oh, there's a downside. Oh, never mind. Next one, amazing. Oh, it's killed a few people. Oh, never mind. It's like a child, constantly eating sweets and then having a sore tummy and then, I feel better. And then more and more sweets and, and then more. It's this strange cycle. We don't seem to learn our lessons, is I suppose what I'm saying.
I've been kind of for a while also struggling and you're talking about it a bit, our inability to keep up. Like when in the early 2000s, everyone was talking about like the singularity, right? The technological singularity, the point at which the exponential increase of technology hits a point where we can't really keep up.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the first kind of thing with the singularity. And now people seem to just mean like, well, when AI becomes sentient. But if you go back to that original idea of the singularity, I think there's an argument that we hit that in like 2010, 2012. Like we hit that already. We're in the singularity. We're at the point where exponential increase of technology has surpassed our ability to keep up with it in a healthy way.
The fact that this thing as a single example has evolved as much as it has, I mean, it basically the little bit of public release happening in the past couple months, and then you just continually see the changes, because as soon as you allow this to have a sort of neural or network development, in the sense where it's essentially, you know, it's having the evolutionary methodology, but at its own time scale, which is so compressed as to be ununderstandable. It's not on our time scale. All of a sudden, we've got this thing that is just there, and it wasn't there before. Where did this come from? And you know, you walking are on your time scale. You're on the walking time scale. You know, I think you mentioned in your book, you work on a song when you're walking. The reason that, you know, we work on things creatively like that in that type of a walk is because you're setting that pace for yourself. You know, you are on your human being time scale. This thing does not come from us. This is other than us. It thinks like us in the same way that a calculator thinks like us. You know, it's on its own time scale and its own development scale, and we don't have any defenses on something to deal with something, incorporate something like that.
Yeah, and obviously we're all very different, and we all have our different rates of dealing with things. So I'm sure it'll be different for the spectrum of people out there. But essentially, we all have a human sense of time. I mean, we all exist within about 100 years. So, you know, we can imagine 200 years, but 500 years starts to get a bit flaky, and 2,000 years or 5,000 years, we really can't imagine that. 50 million years, not a hope. So, you know, we may all be very different in our spectrum of dealing with current technological changes, societal changes, but we are still human essentially, and there is a bandwidth for dealing with this stuff. This is really every comment I've seen online, I understand what they're saying. I understand that that people think it's exciting and enabling and all those things. And God knows it is, like every technological advance. I don't want this to be a 2-hour moan. But I guarantee every single technological advance has huge pluses and minuses, and the minuses always creep in later. They're always the shadow that follows, that we start to become aware of when the collateral damage starts to happen. And there are lessons to be learned and forethought to be had, and I don't think it's happening.
Well, let me say how grateful I am that your book is, you know, one of the first statements accompanying this technology made by, you know, an artist who is grappling with it. And, you know, the title prompt is, you know, a fantastic insight into your process, and that you are giving it a prompt, but it in turn is prompting your reaction. And I'm just so grateful that book, and, you know, our series could be part of the first statements in this, that they should incorporate the human. You know, this is not just like an art director didn't sit down and say, hey, I can save some money by, you know, putting out this book that's going to have Dave McKean's name on it, and he's not going to have to draw anything. You know, you are making something that is about the thing that is coming. You know, you are cresting the wave while observing it. And I think that is an extremely valuable thing. And, you know, I just really want to thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks. I mean, it's all fascinating, isn't it? For to a degree. I mean, it sparks lots of thoughts about the deepest possible subjects. Every conversation I've had with everybody, not necessarily people who have any interest or knowledge of this ends up at the most fundamental levels of human existence. What and why we do the things that we do, and asking those why questions, not just the what and how questions, I think are at the center of it.
Yeah, and I feel like really privileged to talk to you about it, and like same as Sean, like I'm really proud of what we've done, and I'm really excited that it's, like the other thing that's coming out in this is equally looking at it from the, like me and Sean, as soon as we start reading the PDF, we start texting back and forth. Oh, he's asking all the right ethical questions. Like, like this is awesome. Like this is, it's just, I am really glad because, like you said, people need to think about it. I'm really glad that these are going to be early statements, that it's not going to be someone making the Batman AI comic is going to be the first one that gets awareness.
Yeah. So I wish these conversations had happened with the developers.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wish they would have
never happened.
Artists.
Never happens.
No, they should have had artists in using it, or if they did, it wasn't. I mean, they should be going to guys like you with this like public record of excellence in the field for
multiple fields that overlap.
Multiple
That's
fields
part of
a long time, and someone who's your career has been defined by like incessant kind of playfulness with the new. You've always adopted those things, and those are the type of people who are going to be set up to understand immediately these, like you did. You within 12 days you produce this book that understands every important consequence of what's coming, and those are the type of people that they should be having in the boardroom. The beta test.
Yeah, I absolutely. Well, it would have been nice to be there. My daughter was great on this. I explained what I was doing. She said, "What are you up to at the moment?" And I explained what I was doing, and I explained about reading this book, the Artist in the Machine, and all this, the various projects that write AI poetry and AI screenplays and AI music. And she just said, "Why? People love doing those things. Why don't you get AI to do all the crappy jobs that nobody wants to do?" And that's a perfectly reasonable response.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's AI projects out there trying to relieve some of the boredom from our life. But it seems crazy to get AI to... Why do you want an AI to write poetry? The internet is full of terrible poetry. The last thing we want is 1,000 poems a minute spat out by AI, all dreadful. We don't need that. Why would anybody think that that's a good thing to do?
Well, and why does anyone think that intelligence is a good thing? Like, why is anyone on the path towards creating an artificial intelligence? The reason they're going after poetry and art and these other things is because those are the ones that seem the most human. And so if we're trying to create an intelligence, those are the ones you better topple, because that's like going back to the Turing test. Can it have a conversation? Like, we don't have a good enough definition of intelligence or sentience to be able to answer that question. But what we can answer is a behavioral thing. Can it behave like a human in conversation? Can it behave? And so that's why they're going after those ones. So then you extend your daughter's question to like, why are we so interested in making this artificial sentience anyways? Like that, and we've been talking about that in sci-fi forever, and they're still doing it. Like, we know it's a bad idea. Like, what are you guys doing?
And in framing your sentence, you said toppling. These are the things that they're trying to topple, the human things, the humanness. Exactly. Yeah. Why are we speaking in those terms? Why are you trying to topple the humanness in the world? Why are you trying to topple it?
That's how you prove the success in their realm.
Okay, that you're right. That answers the question, but it doesn't answer the why of why you would want to do that. Really, why? As a technical exercise, that's how you do something. But I don't know why you would want to do that.
Why is that your realm in the first place? Yeah. Why is this a project that you find? And that's why I say, like, why is it even a project where we want to make another sentience on this planet? The only answer I can come to is that we're so fascinated with our own sentience and we can't describe it. The most you can do is say, well, from my experience in this meat sack, it feels fluid, but I don't really know. I'm not a cognitive scientist, but the cognitive scientist doesn't have any better answer than you do yet. And they want to, and this is why I chose the abolition of man. That's the last conquest. That's the thing we're most fascinated about, because Sean, I think you've talked about narcissists. Like, we want to know ourselves. And I think the impulse towards AI is, if we can create a provable sentience outside of ourselves, something in the process, we've then answered what's going on in our own brains. And I think
that's a dangerous roll of the dice, that, isn't it?
Well, that's what C.S. Lewis is saying. Like, you will get the answer, but as soon as you get the answer, you become irrelevant.
Well, that's like saying
the answer doesn't matter because you're no longer there to enjoy it.
By analogy, that would be saying that I love my dog and therefore I should become a taxidermist.
Wow. Yeah, that's a strong metaphor. I'm going to come back to my fisherman. It's like, it seems to me like you're a little community, 2 or 3 of you are the fishermen who go, or fisher people that go off and shoot, that provide the fish for the village. Other people do other things. And it's a perfectly workable little ecosystem. What those fishermen are doing are trying to get the most fish they can. But they're humans. They go off and they get 5 or 6, 7 fish a day. Comes back, that's perfect for the town. It's a little perfectly balanced, equilibrium little village. Works. And it works for the fish as well, because 3 fishermen can't fish all the fish. It's sustainable. If an AI trawler comes in and says, look, what you're trying to do is get all the fish you can, we can get them all in the morning. We can just bottom trawl the bay and then you'll have all the fish. And okay. And then that happens. And the whole ecosystem is shot, isn't it? There's no fish left. Everybody gets more fish than they can actually eat. So the fish becomes meaningless, it just rots. It's not food anymore. And nobody's asked, why are you doing that? They've asked the how question, how can we get the most fish we want? They've answered all those questions perfectly. But nobody's asked, why are you doing this?
Well, and all the fish rot, and then there's no more fish to breed 10 years down the line. Yeah. So you've caught them all at once, but
there you go. Yeah. That is my closing metaphor for this afternoon.
Well,
a large pile of rotting fish.
Yeah. Well, sorry to leave it so bleak, but I will say, to leave it on a more hopeful note.
Yeah, please do.
I do still think for a while, like us working in comics, us working in narrative, controlling the narrative and the meaning creation, not in the bleak sense of the conceptual artists with their bullshit statements, but people making genuine human statements, we still have a while, right?
Yeah, I'm actually going to broaden it even more than that, because I don't just want it to be about protecting my life as a comic artist. I think from now on, the why is going to be crucial. So when art students come up to me with their portfolios, or if I go to art schools or at conventions or something, and I'm showing people's work, or online, or whatever the context, if they show me images, I never did put a huge amount of attention on the technical facility involved, although at the time, pre-AI, that was a factor. If you could technically draw well and technically paint well, that was a factor. But now I'm only going to be interested in why did you do this?
Yeah.
Tell me the story behind it. Tell me the connection. Why did this move you? Why did you do this? I want to know why. And so long as I think we're making why work that answers that question, for the moment we'll be able to continue.
And if we play it right, it's a potential to topple the bullshit, because it's too easy to proliferate the bullshit. So if we play it right, then it's the answer to everything that's come since Duchamp. It can be the return, to
maybe
poetry and meaning and
You are an
hopefully.
optimist, Carson. I admire you, your optimism, Carson.
You are
I said-
definitely a glass half full person.
If
Well
we
done.
play it right, which we usually don't. But that goes back, Sean, to also your reframing utility. And I think you reframe utility from the out product to what Dave is talking about, the kind of psychotherapeutic doing utility, and that could be huge too.
I just found that your metaphor incredibly moving. Yeah, I have young kids. One is 7 and one is 4, and they had a strict no television, no screens, no anything for the first 3 years of their lives, and they have no addiction to that kind of things. And so I see the visceral way in which they interact with their environments, and we go to this park down the street that has a local garden, and I watch them swat at the bees and try to sneak produce and find the pears and apples that have fallen on the ground and try all of them out, and eat like 15 that have all and they just have this engagement with the world that is 100% of the moment. And I remember those feel, you said fisherman. I'm sorry that was the emotional connection for me, that, when you were just sitting and waiting, and that it'll happen eventually. We're fishers of art. You put pen to paper, sometimes because you have an idea, or sometimes because you need the release that you get from creating something that didn't exist before. And responding to it in the moment, and I would hate to think that that's going to go away.
Yeah, well, we're all going to start tearing up, be depressed. So I'll say thank you so much, Dave. I mean, it's just an absolute honor to talk to you, and then the conversation has been extremely enriching and fascinating. So I couldn't thank you enough. I mean, we've gone for 2.5 hours of your time that you spent with us, and
I really appreciate your time and making the space for this, and really appreciate it.
No, it's been a pleasure. It's good to talk, isn't it? It's always good to talk, and work it through. But yes, congratulations on the book. I did think, I thought everything. I was astonished and appalled and physically frightened of it, and drawn to it, and all the things that this medium and your articulation of it, I think, would hope to achieve.
Well, I think that people would do themselves a real favor right now and go out and pick out Prompt. You have a limited sale, is 500 copies, I believe.
Well, yes. The thing was, there was no publisher on earth that could accept the project and have it in the shops in 3 weeks' time. I needed it out. I needed to be able to give it to people. So I thought the only way of doing it was to do it myself. And then I'll shop around and maybe try and get a longer run, or I'll just do a longer run later on in the year when I've got a bit of time. And I may even add to it on the back of the response to it and these conversations with people like yourselves and with myself. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be an essential, I think especially having that feedback loop will make it really interesting. And I think that Prompt will be an essential document for people thinking about how to grapple with this. And I think hopefully this conversation becomes an essential kind of document with some kind of little bits of nuggets of how people should think about this. So,
and even as these technologies continue to change, each of these works are also documentations of where they were at the moment they were created. I think it's important that we add, Carson, the first issue of Abolition of Man comes out in October, but it says this was generated by Midjourney from, June 9th to June 13th or whatever. Because that is part of what this shifting thing continues to shift. And I'm sure our opinions, positive or otherwise, will continue to shift as well.
And for the next book I'm doing, I'm working on a little stamp that says guaranteed 100% AI free. like sugar free and gluten free.
I'm gonna draw my next thing with just my fingers.
Yeah.
Everyone has a little fingerprint on there, and you can figure out which finger I used for different different lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thanks.
Really, it's tremendous. Really appreciate it. And
Thanks very much.
thank you for all the many decades of stunning work.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.
The Abolition of Man is a 5-issue mini-series done by myself and Sean in collaboration with the Midjourney AI. What you're seeing here is the cover to issue 1 and the first couple pages of issue 1. This first issue, we fed it an essay by C.S. Lewis, and this is just the imagery that the computer spat back at us. Issues 2 and 3 are a narrative, starting with the story that I wrote when I was 21, and then Sean's going to write issue 3, picking up where I left off. In this one, I'm kind of trying to force the AI to give me the images I want, and then doing some tweaking in Photoshop to get these kind of colored looks on it. For issue 4, we're turning the task of writing over to the AI as well. So the AI has written the script, and then we've just put that into the Midjourney AI, and it's turned out art. The script and the art is some of the absolutely most horrific stuff I've ever seen. We're a bit scared to even publish this issue. And I don't have any art to show for it yet, but Sean and I have decided to do a 5th issue of Abolition as well, because we have someone who we're really, really excited to have on board, providing an essay for that 5th issue that will illustrate, and we'll announce more about that soon. Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.